Hey everyone, welcome back to React in Depth. In this video, I'd like to do a follow-up to the introduction video where I mentioned we're going to do a bunch of setup together to get React up and running so we can actually get our app on the screen to actually play with things and get it working for the first time. So this video is going to be all about the React setup. We're going to go over some tools and technologies that we need to actually get it installed on our computer and working. As well as just some extra nice to haves as we're building the websites that we're going to be building together throughout this course so that we have some add-ons for our browser and the right IDE and the terminal, as well as some other smaller tools set up correctly so that we can actually do things a bit easier together and so that your screen actually matches exactly what I have on my screen as well. We're also going to go over some prerequisites just at a high level so you have all the things that you need before you jump straight into React. And we're going to go over a tool that I'm going to introduce, which you're going to be using throughout the course, and some possible alternatives as well that you might see out in the wild. So without further ado, let's get right to the content. Okay, so to start, I want to go over the main tools that we're going to be using in order to actually even get React up and running and actually get our fingers on the code so we can actually start writing different components and other things in React together. So you might have seen a bunch of these, but let's go through them together to start. The first thing that we need is NodeJS, and NodeJS actually comes with NPM installed as well, which is a secondary tool. NodeJS is the runtime to actually build JavaScript applications outside of the browser that previously wasn't possible before tools like Node.js. There's many other tools like Dino and things like that are coming out more recently. However, we're going to stick with Node.js since most of the tooling that we're looking at here is built around Node.js specifically. We're going to be using the latest version, I believe. I might have an older version installed, but it shouldn't really matter too much. And as you install Node.js, by default, NPM should be installed as well. This is a package manager. I have a video on both the installation for Node.js as well as how NPM works in the JavaScript series if you need some help on actually how to get those working. NPM is going to allow us to actually reach out to the package manager repository so that we can actually download React and some of the other tools that we need to actually get a project started. So if you have those installed, great. There are some other tools we're going to be using. We're going to be using a tool right here, this V with a lightning symbol. It's called Vite, and this is kind of French for quick. I always get tempted to pronounce it Vite, because that's probably how you'd say it in English, but it is named after quick in French, which is Vite. So I'll try my best to remember that, and we'll look at our website for what this does for us later. But at a high level, Vite is going to allow us to actually kind of build our project in React, and comes with a whole bunch of nice tooling involved. And I have a separate slide to explain it in a bit more depth in a second. So we don't actually need to install Vite per se. As long as we have Node and NPM, we can actually kind of download this as a separate tool to actually use in our project. And I'll show you all the steps to do that shortly. The next thing that we need is VS Code or Visual Studio Code. Now, you don't really strictly need VS Code. You can really use any IDE or text editor that you're most comfortable with. Given that this is the most popular and has a bunch of really nice extensions, I would advise you to do this if this is your first time, just so that you kind of match a lot of other tutorials and what I'm seeing on my screen as well. It really is quite a good editor. It can be a bit slow sometimes, but I think the team does a pretty good job at supporting many different technologies and many different languages. And there's a lot of nice extensions for React that we can look at in the future as well. So go ahead and install that if you don't have it installed already. And finally, last but not least, down here, I have a kind of tertiary tool that we're going to be using a bit later down in the course, but it's important to get that installed. This is an extension for our browser. So this is mainly, I believe, only for Chrome and Firefox. I don't actually know if this works for Safari. I'll have to take a look, but I'm pretty sure it at least works for Chrome and Firefox. I'll kind of quickly go through these tools one at a time just to show you kind of what's involved. But ideally, we have that involved or installed, on our system as well. So let me just pull up my web browser and pull up a couple of these tools really quick, just so you can see kind of what I mean by having these installed. So for Node.js, really fast, if you don't have it, you want to go to Node.js in Google, come to the website, and you can download either of these. You can download the LTS or the current. I would probably advise the LTS, which is 18 point something. Doesn't really matter too much what you have. You can kind of go through the install process. I have an entire video on how to do that as well. The next thing that we can look at is Visual Studio Code. So same thing for that. If you go to Google and you go to their website, you should be able to download it directly from their website and install it. Again, I have a tutorial as well in the JavaScript series on how to do that. So when you install Node.js, you get npm with it. You actually have to go out of your way to uncheck it. So make sure you don't accidentally do that. And I'll show you kind of what happens if you don't have that installed shortly. But that should take care of Node, npm, and VS Code. This is going to be installed later using a separate method for each project, as I'll show you shortly. I just want to show you React DevTools as well. So if we go to React in Google Developer Tools, it depends on the browser that you're using. Let me maybe zoom in a little bit more just so you can see this a little bit clearer. React Developer Tools right here. This is for Google, so I can probably open that as well. And I think if I scroll down, here's the Mozilla one, which, I guess I'll show you that one really quick. So that is for Firefox, so you can go ahead and install that if you have Firefox. And then if you have Chrome, you can go ahead and install it. You can see I already have it installed, so it says remove from Chrome. So once you have that, that really is everything that you need. And I'll actually kind of pop over to VS Code and actually show you how we can actually get Vite. See, I already did it. I already messed it up. Vite working through the terminal, but it should be pretty easy to get working. I just want to go over some prereqs really quick. So speaking of prereqs, this is where things get a little bit challenging. And I don't want to scare people away when we're talking about prereqs, because I fundamentally believe that like literally everyone can learn React, and it's a fantastic tool to actually learn. And it really helps you conceptualize how to build websites in a much easier way than just using kind of these building blocks that are really behind it. However, that said, I would highly encourage you to be comfortable, and I'll kind of try my best to define that word in the context of these technologies, with at least these three technologies, some more than others. So the most important one here is JavaScript, okay, which is what I have on the left over here. So what does it mean to be comfortable with JavaScript? So you need to be an expert? No, absolutely not. A beginner, you could probably get away with that, right? I would say that you would probably want to be comfortable with things like objects and arrays and functions and how they all kind of work together, and at least have kind of built a few small programs using JavaScript by itself in something like maybe Node.js, or even just in the browser directly. What is the reason for this, right? A lot of people are like, well, why do I need to know JavaScript? Like, it's like, I just need to learn React. Now, you could do that. And I'm actually very passionate about this subject, so I'm going to spend a minute talking about it because I really believe it's super, super important. If you jump straight into React without trying to understand JavaScript first, it's actually going to be to your detriment, because it becomes very confusing to try to separate what is React and separate what is JavaScript. And JavaScript is the fundamental building block that builds up React. And in order to actually know how to do a lot of things, even in React itself, you need to know basic vanilla JavaScript, because that's what everything is built out of. React just builds on top of it by adding a few very useful APIs that we're going to be seeing together throughout this series. So can you get away without learning too much JavaScript? Yes. At least kind of know things I mentioned, like objects and arrays and functions, some small projects that you built together with JavaScript. If you want more practice with that, take a look at my JavaScript series, and I have some projects in there, especially through the midpoint, where if you feel comfortable with that kind of stuff, then you're fine or good enough for React. You're always going to be learning this stuff. You don't have to be an expert by any means, but I would say that if you get confused with what is React and what is JavaScript, it's really important to really make sure you have a basic intuition for what the differences are. The best kind of analogy I kind of have is like, I remember at one point a long time ago, I was trying to learn Unity, which is for game development. And I actually didn't know a language that worked with Unity, which is called C#. And as I was learning Unity, I was actually getting really confused with what is like Unity stuff and what is C#, just the language itself in C#. And there are a lot of kind of crossovers and things that are similar and similar ways to do things. And it just became really, really confusing for me. So I actually went back and tried to learn C# by itself, and then learned Unity totally separately, and then tried to merge the two together later after I had a better understanding. And that turned out to work much better. And it was much easier for me to understand, okay, like I know that this is separate from this thing. And the exact same is true for many other technologies, as well as JavaScript and React. Okay, enough about that. The next things are HTML and CSS. Let me start with HTML. So HTML, I would say, like, honestly, just do like at the minimum, like build a basic website, know what all the different main elements are, like divs and paragraphs and forms and inputs and stuff like that. I would say the most important part, ironically, of actually needing to know HTML for JavaScript or for React, is actually knowing the DOM. the document object model, which funnily enough is actually JavaScript working on top of HTML in this case. So if you know a bit of the DOM and a bit of HTML, that's fine. Do you need to go do an entire course on HTML? Absolutely not. We're actually going to be using an entire different technology, not even HTML at all, when we're building this course out together, called JSX, which is kind of like a superset of HTML and JavaScript kind of merged together. So know the basics, maybe spend like 10 minutes just studying HTML. You can go to MDN and they have a quick kind of walkthrough of that, and that should be good enough. Now, everyone's favorite is CSS, which I have right here on the right in blue. So, okay, like I would say that honestly, if you know CSS, or if you are one of those people who just doesn't even want to touch CSS to start, that's fine. Honestly, it doesn't matter. We're going to be building a lot of projects together. I'm actually not going to spend very much time styling them because I'm going to be focusing on the logic behind React. You can use CSS to actually make them look a lot more beautiful and a lot more realistic and kind of production ready and something you'd like to share with other people. But the actual logic and understanding how the actual core of React works and how to actually build websites with React doesn't need you to necessarily know CSS. That said, there are a lot of really awesome tools in CSS that build on top of it. Things like that you might have heard before, like Tailwind or Bootstrap and things like that. But at its core, I think just knowing the basics kind of a CSS, like the whole joke of knowing how to center a div at least kind of thing, although I probably can't even do it off the top of my head right now, like it doesn't really matter too much. I would really focus in order your efforts on JavaScript, at least the level that I mentioned, if possible, and then HTML, and then lastly CSS. And if you kind of want to ignore CSS, it's fine. It's just your applications are not going to look as beautiful until you start styling it slightly. Okay, so hopefully that helps a little bit. Now, I want to kind of go to the main kind of crux of this video, which is Vite. I said it properly that time. So this was challenging for me. I actually reached out to the Discord channel to actually figure out kind of what tool to actually use as our kind of main build system and bundler and things like that for this series. You might have heard of something called Create React App. So let me actually just go back to Google really quick, and I'm just going to say create React App. So there, I believe they have a website. So you might have seen this before. This is a really popular tool to build React projects. I've used it several times. In fact, this is kind of the official quote unquote way to do it. The only challenge is it is a little bit slower and it doesn't support ES modules, which is kind of my main big gripe. And I'm a really big fan of ES modules and kind of things being standards. And if you don't know what any of that means, I have a JavaScript course on ES modules, but effectively it's a way to import and export properly without actually dealing with kind of the funkiness of Node. So this Create React App by default doesn't support it, and Vite does, as well as many other things. Vite is also much faster. It's a much more modern tool. It's a bit slimmer, quicker to download, quicker to load things. And has some nice newer features and plugins as well. Not that Create React App doesn't have all that stuff. It's just that I think if we're going to be using something repetitively many times and constantly downloading it, I'd rather have something a bit smaller and quicker to use, as well as something a bit more modern that supports things like ES modules. So that is what Vite is. Let's just go to their website real quick. So I'm going to come to Google. I'm going to type in Vite. And we're going to see Vite.js. That's their, sorry, not Vite. Vite.js is the name of the app. Vitejs.dev is their website. So if I click on that, this is what their website looks like. So we can't actually download this, but I'll show you how we're actually going to kind of use it within our project in a second to actually get React started. So what is Vite and why are we even using this thing? Why can't we just kind of like, start an HTML file and all that kind of stuff without having to use this tool? So in order for us to build React apps, since React is not something that's standardized in the web, it has a lot of tools and technologies inside of it that need kind of some parsing and pre-processing on top of it to actually get it in a state that the browser can understand. So that is actually really what a bundler and some of this other tooling stuff does for us. And I'll show you kind of a demo of what this bundling thing is in a second. This is probably a video for another day. There's definitely a lot of cool stuff that we can talk about when we talk about bundling. I'll just give you a little bit of a bite size shortly. There's some tooling, things like linting, which is kind of the squiggly red underlines and yelling at you with errors. There's different plugins that we can do for things like CSS transforms and all that kind of fun stuff. And then it just automatically reloads our app every time we make a change, which is really nice. You might have used tools that do that for you in the past. Specifically though, for us, it is a development server. So that actually means that it spins up a small web server and starts serving our files for us and actually reloads the pages and recompiles everything behind the scenes automatically for us into a version that the browser actually understands, since the browser doesn't understand React by default. So it transforms everything very quickly behind the scenes as we're saving files into JavaScript, HTML, and CSS that the browser does actually understand. And I'll show you what that looks like again in a second. There's a lot more to Vite. I would encourage you kind of to look through the website and look at some of their features, right? So for example, you can see they list some of the things over here. A lot of different cool companies use it over here. There's a whole bunch of documentation on how to actually use it. I would probably stay away from that to start. We're mainly going to be using it to actually just start a React project. And maybe we'll go over some basic plugins later for things like CSS transforms. But to start, really, it's kind of an out-of-the-box kind of React project that you can just start working on. So I'm going to go back to Google here, and I'm going to go Google for Vite React app. And that's going to take us to Google getting started with Vite. Probably could have just clicked to that link, but I just want to show you how you can do that if you go to Google first. So Vite React app, getting started should hopefully be one of your first results there. And you should land on a page that looks kind of like this. I think I'm already quite zoomed in. There you go, Vite, French for quick, like Vite. I hope I'm doing it justice. So there's a whole bunch of cool stuff in here that it says it includes, but the main part that we're interested in here is if we scroll down a little bit, there should be this section called Scaffolding Your First Vite Project. Now, I do want to mention that Vite is actually a generic tool that supports more than just React. You can do all sorts of different technologies with Vite, since the actual technologies that it uses to do things for React are actually generalized across every single language, things like bundling and hot module replacement and different plugins that you can write for every different version of JavaScript. So you can see it works with vanilla JavaScript, TypeScript, Vue, React, a whole bunch of other different tools like Svelte and stuff like that. So it is not a React specific tool. However, there is a plugin for Vite for React that allows us to write React projects really nicely and nice and quickly as well. Create React app, as a contrast, is specifically for React, and you can't build, for example, a Svelte app or a Vue app using Create React app by default. So let's scroll down to this section over here, and you can see that in order to create a project, we can actually use some of these commands over here. So now what I'd like to do is actually switch over to VS Code and actually get started with our first React project to make sure that everything actually is up and running correctly. So I'm going to switch over to VS Code over here. I've actually opened a folder in here. I have a whole video on the JavaScript channel on how to actually set up VS Code and kind of get your terminal working and everything like that. So if you are doing this for the first time, definitely check that out. But once you have VS Code open, make sure to open the folder that you're interested in. I'm going to open a new terminal, which should actually open it here on the side. I actually think I have two open, so I'll just open one over there. And you can see that I'm actually in the folder for this particular project, right? So I'm documents, YouTube, React in depth, React setup, and then code, right? So if I do an ls in here, it's totally empty. There's nothing actually in this folder to start. Okay, so to actually start a React project using Vite, let's kind of read through this really quick. So it says, depending on which tool you have, so I mentioned that we have NPM, and if you're using kind of one of the newer versions of Node.js, which comes with NPM, you should have 7+. The way that you can test which version NPM you have is you can do NPM dash, I believe it's capital V or dash lowercase v. There you go, dash lowercase v. I think my face is in the way as usual. NPM dash lowercase v should give you the version of NPM that you have. So I'm using 7.20. I think that's new or old. I actually don't know, but it is definitely 7+. So I'm going to need to use this version. If you're using an older version, it's going to be this version. Or if you have something like Yarn or PNPM installed, you can use one of these versions, but they're all very similar. So I'm going to say npm create Vite at latest. So let me just switch back here. I'm going to say npm create Vite at latest. And let me just zoom in a tiny bit more just so that you can see that a bit more clearly. And then I'm going to do a name of the app. So I'm going to call this My React App. And this is just kind of some word wrapping going on. So this is all one word right here, right? My-react-app is just line wrapping over there. And then we're going to say a -- for 7+ for NPM, and then -- template. And then we're not going to use Vue, we're going to use React. So I'm going to say -- and then I already forgot, -- template. And then we don't want to use Vue, we want to use React. And again, we know this because they mentioned that here are all the different templates that they support right now. And we're going to be using this one right here, which is React. So NPM, we want to create Vite. We're going to use the latest Vite, or Vite, I said it incorrectly. My-react-app, -- and then -- template, and then React. So notice all the spacing, all the -- there's quite a lot going on in that command. So definitely try to make sure you type it correctly. So I'm going to press enter here. And looks like that was pretty quick. So now it's saying scaffolding project is done. Now we can change directory into that project. It's cut off from my face again. And it's saying we have to run some commands, npm install and npm run dev. So I'm going to change into my React app over there. And I'm going to open this up in my VS Code as well, just so you can take a look. So it looks like it added a whole bunch of files for us and a whole bunch of folders. There's a public folder with SVG in there. There's an SRC with a whole bunch of files in there. And then there's all these other files as well. I would like to try to do this command. This is very common. I do this all the time. I'm going to run npm run dev, and I'll show you what this does in a second. But I hope that this actually gets our project started so we can actually see something on the screen. And if I run that, we're going to see that it doesn't work. We get an error, which is that command not found for Vite. Okay, so the reason is because we don't actually have Vite installed. But what does that mean? I mentioned that we're actually going to download this from npm. But notice that there's a package JSON that came down with this project, but there's no actual node modules folder in here, right? So if you remember from our ES modules and npm a video in JavaScript, if we don't have node modules, what we can do is we can run npm install. And if we look at the, let me just close this for a second, just so you can take a look. If you run npm install in any folder that has a package JSON, we actually will grab the dependencies and the dev dependencies. So if we look through this really quick, it looks like the dependencies for this Vite project are React version 18.2 and React DOM. And then there's a bunch of dev dependencies that get installed in dev mode. And right here at the bottom is Vite, which is what we're going to be using, and then some plugins and other things like that, like linting that come with it. So let's try that. We're going to be running this script right here, dev. So I'm going to bring back my sidebar here. I'm going to run npm install. And what that's going to do is actually it's going to go and grab all these dependencies and all these dev dependencies and actually put them into a node modules. So you'll notice after this command is done running that there's actually a node modules folder for me up here on the left hand side. And I just want to show you really quick why this is important and what that command Vite is not found came from. If you open up this node modules, these are all of the programs and scripts that got downloaded. So it was looking for something called Vite right here. That's what we're trying to run. And since we don't have it installed, we're actually going to look in the node modules to see if it's over there. And we didn't have node modules before, hence the error that we got, but now we do. So if we scroll down to the very, very bottom, because that's in alphabetical order, lo and behold, there is Vite right here. Right, that's Vite, and inside of Vite is actually the binaries needed to actually get this to run. So that is where when we actually run npm run dev, it's going to be looking in here inside the node modules to actually get that working, which is pretty awesome. So I'm just going to close that off since there's a lot of stuff in there. We don't really need it all right now. But now if we run npm run dev, it's going to find it in node modules, and we're actually going to have Vite run. And look at that. Now we actually have a React app running on a local development server. It's even giving us a URL here to click on that's going to actually serve this application up in the files. So if you hold Control or Command and then you click on this or just copy and paste it, it should open up in your browser. And look at that. Isn't that awesome? So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here just so we can take a look. But that is the default Vite plus React app that comes with this bundle. And we can actually start messing around with this to start. We can actually even click on this to see that it's actually working with state in this case. So that's all pretty awesome. So that is Vite and getting that working from the start. If you do have any errors with this, try to read the error message and Google it. If you're still having errors, try to let us know in the comments and we'll try to help you out in there. But most of this stuff hopefully should work out of the box. That's one of the nice things about using Vite, is it's actually pretty quick to get up and running. So always make sure to create the Vite project and then actually npm install after changing into that folder. And then you can actually run something like npm run dev. Okay. Now, I'd like to actually show a little bit of exploration of this project to wrap up this video and a couple of other small things as well to help us get started for the next set of videos. So if you open up the SRC, which is short for the source, there's a whole bunch of files in here. So let's keep that at the back of our mind for a second. One interesting file that you probably are going to notice is this index.html. So if I open that, I'm just going to close this side section off just so I have a bit more space to show you what's happening. If I open up the index.html, you'll see this is a regular HTML file. There's nothing fancy about this. In fact, the only fancy thing about this is that there appears to be a script source here that is JSX instead of JS. So that's kind of weird. Right? That's definitely not a normal thing. I wonder what that's all about. So we'll look at JSX actually in the next video together, but let's actually see what that source is. Also notice that they have a root element here called a div with an ID of root. So we're going to look in source/main.jsx. So I'm going to open up that source folder. It looks like there's two CSS files. There's an assets folder, which just has an SVG in it. And then there's an app.jsx and a main.jsx. So we're interested in main.jsx. If I open that one up, we get this. Okay, so what is this? It looks like we're importing React. We're importing React DOM. Why do we have two Reacts? Well, React is just a UI library and we can use it in many different contexts. In this case, we're actually using React with the DOM, the document object model in the browser. There are many other ways to use React that have nothing to do with the DOM. For example, React Native, which actually allows you to use the same React, but in the context of mobile applications for Android and for iOS. So you are still using React, you're just not using React DOM. In that case, you're using React Native. So React is just a higher level abstraction to allow you to create these UI user interfaces on top of whatever kind of base platform that you're trying to develop on, as long as people develop the actual library to interface with that base platform. So not too deep into that, but hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. We're using React, we're using React DOM. We're importing app, which looks to be that other file that we looked at earlier, and we're importing some CSS, where we're creating a root. So we're saying document.create get element by ID of that root, which we actually saw in the index earlier, so that's nice. And it's saying render react.strict mode, whatever that means, and then app. And I don't actually know what this is, right? Like if you're looking at this for the first time, we're like, what on earth is this? This is like HTML, but not HTML. Like I'm really confused. This is something called JSX, which we're going to look at in the next video. But most importantly here, we have app. So what is app? Well, if we go to app, which is coming from app.jsx, we're going to see this gigantic file. So in here, what do we have? We have importing a function from React called useState. We're importing some SVGs and some CSS. So ignore these for now. Those are just some styling things. The only actually thing that's interesting here that we're actually importing is the useState, which we're actually going to look at in a future video, actually quite a bit later, because we have to understand quite a lot of things before we actually get to state. Below this is a function. And if we scroll down, or actually let me reduce this function, you can see actually this entire file, other than the imports, is just this function which we are exporting, right? So that's all we have in this file, is just this one function. This is what's called a component, like a functional or hook-based component, and it's using some state in this case, which we're going to look at in other videos. It is returning, again, this funky JSX syntax, which actually is merging HTML and some JavaScript in here. So we have some things that are not part of HTML, for example, like this kind of weird stuff, and some other code in here, for example, that is all part of the JSX syntax, which we'll learn in a second. But if you actually look through this and then compare it to what we were just looking at over here, it should relatively match up. That's the really cool thing. And to prove that to you, let me just change something over here. Let me, like, for example, let me change this header one, this H1, where it says Vite plus React, and I'll just say is awesome. And then, you know, maybe I'll add like a fire emoji, right? And then I'll save this, make sure to save the file, right? I'm gonna save this file, and Vite is actually going to, behind the scenes, kind of rerun this file, recompile it, and it's going to be displayed for us if we come back right here and we actually have it displayed, which is pretty awesome. Okay, notice that the count was actually saved as well and didn't actually change, which is part of that hot module reloading thing as well. So that is pretty cool. So you can change a few things in there and actually see things change. And we're going to be doing this from scratch later on in the next video when we actually look at JSX and we start building our components. But that just gives you a bit of an appreciation, understanding of actually what is happening. We change a file. When we change that file, we actually come back and we can actually see that change in real time in the browser. And this is, in my opinion, what makes things like web development so much fun, is that you get this nice instant feedback for what you're actually doing and what you're actually building, very similar to how someone would actually really use your site once you actually deploy it and have it fully built. Okay, so I highly encourage you to change a few other things in here and mess around with it, and you know, you can even break it if you like and then unbreak it. We'll be going deep into this later on, but I do want to kind of show you what all the other things that come with Vite and what React, kind of how it works behind the scenes really quick to wrap up this video. So I'm going to open up my terminal over here really quick, and you can see that it did a hot module refresh update. I'm going to press, I think it's Command D. Is it Command D, Option D, Option D? I think it's Control C for Windows and Command C, Command D, Control D. It's one of those things to exit actually this terminal command. So once you click on there and press one of those hotkey combinations, it should actually get you out of that. I believe it's Control C on PC and Control or Command and Option C on a Mac. That said, once you're out of that, I want to show you something cool. Let me go to the package.json really quick, and I want to scroll down to the scripts section. So what we've been seeing up until now has been the actual development server. However, when we actually send our application to other people to use, or when we actually push it to a kind of a production server for other people to actually to use our application, we are not going to be running in developer mode. We're going to be running it in production mode. So what we need to do is build our application. The reason I want to show you this is because this actually shows that there's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes and gives you a better appreciation for what some of these tools like Vite and Create React App are doing behind the scenes for us. So I'm actually going to run npm. I'm going to say run, which allows us to run scripts. I'm going to run build, which is this Vite build command. So if I'm going to do that, it's going to take a second to build the production build, and it's going to spit out a bunch of files here. It's get cut off by me again. But what happened over there is now over here on the left-hand side, I have a dist, a distribution folder. And inside of there, I have a folder called assets, as well as an index.html, as well as 3 files inside the asset folder, a JavaScript, CSS, and SVG file. So let me just close my terminal for a second, just so I can open this up. If I open up the index file, what you'll see is that no longer are we actually using JSX in here, right? We are actually using JavaScript. Right? If you compare this to the HTML file that we saw previously, where we're using a JSX file, I mentioned JSX is not understandable by the browser. So we need a way to transform that into a regular JavaScript file and regular CSS files that the browser does understand. And that is what this build command and these bundlers actually do, among other things. So in this case, if we actually open up this JavaScript file over here that it's referring to, notice that this is a monstrosity. There is a lot of really crazy stuff happening in here, and none of it makes any sense because this is all minified, so it's super small and super efficient to actually transmit across the wire, across the internet, as a bytes, series of bytes, so it's as small as possible to our clients that are actually using this application. But if you kind of scroll through this file, what you'll see is that there is some stuff that makes sense in here, right? There's some comments for the fact that this is React over here. If you scroll past all of this, you can see that this is JSX runtime, whatever that means. There's another React thing in here. If I scroll down further, more React DOM stuff in there. And then there's a whole bunch of other text. Oh my goodness, this is making me kind of dizzy. and then is there anything else past this? Probably not. I'm going to show you a better version of this in a second. But if you scroll down to the very, very bottom, this I wanted to show you. Look at that. There's my emoji, my fire emoji, right? So this proves that there is actually content in this JavaScript file that's actually coming from our file that we wrote in the JSX together, but this is a regular JavaScript file. So the bundler in Vite is actually taking all of the files that we're writing and spitting out stuff that's understandable by the browser so we can actually use it in the regular context. So that said, how do we actually use this? Well, the best way to actually get these files working is to serve it up as a web server. I'm going to show you a command I like to use to actually get this working. So I'm going to run npx, right, which allows us to run binaries off npm without actually installing them. And the binary we want to run is called serve. And I want to serve out of the dist folder. Make sure there's a slash at the end. So I'm saying to this command, I would like you to kind of pretend that we have like a web server running out of this distribution folder. By default, the index.html is going to be returned. And since that's referencing all these other JavaScript, CSS, and SVG files, it should kind of work out of the box. If I press enter there, it's going to ask you want to install it. I'll just put yes, why not? And then you can see that it does give us a local host to actually run on or a network address. I'm going to hold Command or Control and then click on the localhost one, and lo and behold, there it is. This is our application running in production mode. This is no longer running in development mode. So any changes I make to the code are not going to be reflected here immediately. That's why we need a development server as well as a separate production build for a production server. So why would we ever do this? Why would we not want it to redo as we build? Well, this is very, very efficient, very, very fast code that's running on here. And this is all JavaScript. There's no JSX. Everything has been minified and transformed. And things like Babel, which are tools to transform our JavaScript into versions of the JavaScript language that are much older, it makes all this kind of much better for even older browsers to use, even though we're using very new language features. So at the end of the day, we have a development server and then we have the production server, and they're two separate things. Most of the time when we're doing development, we're working in the development server. When we're finally done and we want to test our application, we're going to be pushing it into a production build, which only happens once in a while, but it is a totally separate process. So here it is. Here's our production build. I can change account, for example, and all the text has changed. I do want to show you one last thing to wrap up this video. If I pull up the developer tools here in Chrome in this case, let me just zoom in a little bit over here. I would like to open the network tab really quick. So if you open the network tab and then you reload this page, the page that's the production build, which is on localhost, what you'll see is usually the first request is out to get the actual HTML, this localhost right here. And if you look at it, there's different tabs. If we look at the response tab, what you'll see is that this is the HTML that gets returned, which looks nothing like what we're actually seeing on the screen. That's because by default, all the stuff that gets rendered on the client side is run through React in order to display anything in the DOM. The HTML is actually not generated in client-side rendering, which is slightly separate from other technologies like server-side rendering and things that are similar to that, which we'll get into in future videos and more advanced videos as well. So just be aware that this is the HTML that comes back. But what I really want to show you is this file right here, the second one, which is the index with the numbers after it. If you look at that and you open it up, I realize that my head is kind of blocking this. So let me let me see if I can move this up a little bit, or I probably just move this over here so we can actually take a look. I'll just do that for now. If you scroll down to the very, very bottom of this file, we actually looked at this file earlier. This is the same exact file that we had shown in VS Code. What you'll see is a better formatted version of it. But check this out. Right here, towards the very bottom of that file, is this function. It looks like it's very similar to what we have in our actual React code, use state. But it's not using things like React, it's using like EL and then like these weird variable names, and they're all very short and very confusing. And we see divs and we see A tags, we see children and targets. We even see our emoji that we added in there and our function to actually increment the counter, right? So all of these things are being passed in to React to actually show us what we're seeing here on the left side of the screen. And this is what the bundler is actually doing. It's transforming things into JavaScript so that React can understand it, parse it, read it, and then actually display things and insert it itself into the actual DOM, because by default, the DOM actually looks like this and only has the root element in it without any content inside. So hopefully that makes sense to you. As a kind of short exercise for you, I would encourage you to actually pull up the actual dev server version of this. So let me just pull up that really quick just so I can show it off to you. So if I do npm run dev, once you have that started, you can pull up the actual dev version of the site, which is this one over here, and you can make sure that your actual extension works for your React dev tool. So if you click on the little arrows here, if you don't have it available, there's a components and a profiler. If you click on components, what you should be able to see is the actual app component in here. And you should be able to look and poke around at many different things in here. Make sure that actually works for you, because we're going to be adding many different components in here over time as we actually build more and more complicated web applications. And this is going to become a very useful tool for us to look at things like the state and the tree hierarchies and context and other stuff like that as we're building out our web apps. So hopefully you found all that interesting. There was a lot packed into this one video. I know it went a bit fast, but hopefully a lot of that kind of is stuff that you can view, and most importantly, the actual content actually shows on the screen and you can actually play around with it. Make sure that you try your best to actually mess around with it and break it and kind of put it back together a little bit, just so you can actually have different things displayed on the screen, like changing the count and all that kind of stuff. What we're going to do in the next video together is build on this idea of what JSX is. So I mentioned that we have these JSX files over here, for example, like this. And I mentioned that JSX is basically like a fancy HTML and JavaScript combination. So we're going to break that down together to actually really understand what it is, why we're using it, and what React actually does with this JSX, so it makes it easier for us to write our web applications and our components, and we can get comfortable enough with this idea to actually start building out our first set of components. So I can't wait to get to that video. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, I'd love it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear in the comments if you have any errors with this process or any issues as you're trying to run this code, or if you have any questions about anything that I went over here or would like me to go into even more depth. But until I kind of hear from you, I'll actually start working on the next video, and I'll see you as we start looking into JSX together. See you later.